All right, well, let's get down to business, shall we? We convene weekly throughout the year, excluding the little holiday hiatus we take, but we get to learn from our friends and neighbors, and sometimes that word neighbor is taking on a regional tone. So Mr. Aaron Brown is a born and raised Iron Ranger who's been writing for a long time, has a published book and a forthcoming book, so you can stay tuned for that. Has run for a while a blog of great repute called Minnesota Brown, and is currently newly a full-time columnist for the Star Tribune after a career of teaching and working in the communications department at Minnesota North. So please join me in welcoming Aaron Brown to the podium.
Wow. Well, happy lunchtime, everybody. I prepared for, a community group that meets every once in a while. And I was thinking, that's like 12, 13 tops, So I'm just amazed. And I feel a little bad being one of the people who got lunch because it's the day after Bastille Day and the door's way over there. And I got to get out of here with my head. So we'll see what I can do. It's true. I have to admit, I'm not from Ely. That's I know it's a fault. It's a character fault. I realize it. But I do have a family connection to Ely that I always think about whenever I come up here, especially over to this side of the lake. My grandfather, Ward, who I've met a couple people who know my grandpa, who's still with us, he's 91. But he worked in the Zenith, I think. The Zenith mine, and he tells this story. This would have been in the 50s, I think, somewhere. And he tells this story of working underground, and he was a mechanic, a handyman. He worked on a lot of the pumps. And he told this story of, it was a very watery, it was way down when the groundwater was seeping in, and of course, you need pumps, and if the pumps aren't running, they send a mechanic to fix the pumps. But while the pumps aren't running, water is entering the space, because that's why you have the pumps. And so he tells this story about being in, at first in, ankle deep water, trying to fix a pump, and then feeling the water, come up as he's working. And realizing that at one point it was him or the pump, it was going to be one or the other, and so he got the pump running. But I always think about, because that's one of a handful of stories he tells about him almost not being here, and he almost fell down a mine shaft near Eveleth, and I like that. I don't know if this is true, but I like to say it. I think my grandpa is one of the last living people to work underground on all three ranges. He's worked on the Cuyuna, the Vermilion, and the Mesabi range. So, it also tells. So I do have a little connection to Ely. I think my dad was a baby at the time, but I have a little connection to Ely, and then a lot of connections to the region, because that I live north of Nashwauk now. I grew up in the Sac-Zim bog, and I met some people who know Zim today. And so, in fact, my grandpa ran a junkyard down in Zim, and I've met not one, but two customers of the Brown and Son salvage yard, where I grew up. And my dad was the son, and my grandpa was Brown. And so this region has always been a part of my blood. I think we're here 5 generations now. And a lot of people say that, and they're, sitting in some big house in the fancy part of town, and they ran a bank or something for that long. My family has, I like to say, I've been on equal parts, the newspaper in the parts about, the town doing well and community activity and people being engaged in that, and then people who are on the criminal system and made poor choices. That's my family. We're more or less on both sides of that equation. You go back far enough and it really doesn't change. We're right on the cusp. And near as I can tell, we've been that way since Europe, as far as I can tell. Machines, mechanics, miners, and then me. And I am none of those things. I grew up on the junkyard and was fascinated with books. I remember reading Treasure Island in the trailer house at Brown and Son Salvage Yard, and a world kind of opening up at a very young age to things way beyond this place. My father briefly worked in the mines, but was laid off in the 80s, along with being laid off from Cummins Diesel. He was a diesel mechanic by trade. My grandfather, I mentioned, worked in the mines, but he mostly was a trucker. My great-grandfather, Ward Sr., was a mining engineer, and that was the connection to a lot of the mining that my grandpa did. So having this long family history on the Iron Range, but then this love of the outside world, I had a predictable path. I was going to leave. That's what a lot of people do. And I certainly intended to. And I got a scholarship, and I went to a place that was exactly 1 day's drive, which I figured was sufficient. Dubuque, Iowa. Yay! All right. Oh, we're making connections left and right. I love Dubuque. Actually, it's a great town. And I remember going to now I'm going to sideline myself, but I went to Dubuque and I worked in radio down there, and they did a few things different than I worked. My first job was in WEVE Eveleth. Yeah, okay. Yep. I worked as an overnight disc jockey through high school on the weekends. So I would sleep. I would come home on Friday, sleep, go to work, sleep, and then during speech season, I did a speech meet, and then I slept and went to work. Anyway, it's a really weird, nerdy, grindy way to live, but that's what I did. In Dubuque, I worked in a news radio station called KDTH, and I remember they did on-air obituaries. So you had a big list, and if you know anything, if you've ever been around newspapers, and I have, but if you've ever been around newspapers, I mean, everybody knows, everybody is born and everybody dies. It's the cycle of life. We understand this, but you know that it goes in bigger cycles than that. And sometimes a lot of people die in a short amount of time because of, sometimes it's the weather. If you talk to people who know this stuff, like the weather, barometric pressure, I've actually read, is a big factor on what causes natural deaths. Natural deaths. I want to make it clear. But some days, reading obituaries at KDTH, Dubuque, Iowa, you'd have a stack of these obituaries to read, and only, like, it's supposed to be a 3-minute newscast, and you got 5 minutes of obituaries. And I just remember the impossibility, the Sisyphean task of reading in a somber and serious tone the day's lost souls. And so anyway, I digressed, but something else happened in Dubuque. I found myself at a college party, and of course I'm figuring I'm going to Chicago. This is where I'm going, and Dubuque is literally on the way to Chicago. It's not quite, a little over halfway. I was so close. I almost made it, and that's where I was going to go next. And I was at this party talking to a girl, and I don't know her real well, but I decided I wanted to impress her. And so I'm trying, it's a subtle change in your tone and your approach, just in the stories you tell. But I lost control of myself. And at one point, I hear myself saying, she asks, "Where are you from?" And I say, "Oh, I'm from northern Minnesota. It's a place called the Iron Range." She doesn't know the Iron Range. So she goes, "Oh, what's that about?" I said, "Well, I tell you, it's got a lot of iron mining." She goes, "Oh." I said, "Well," this is where it starts to go wrong. It's a certain kind of iron mine. We actually mine, and again, I hear myself saying the words. The words are escaping my lips, and I'm powerless to stop them. It's actually a kind of a low-grade iron ore called taconite, and it's actually pretty elaborate in how they turn it into the stuff that gets shipped to the steel mills. Okay, and so it goes on like this. At some point, I'm discussing crushing. The ball mill gets involved at one point. I'm describing the stages of taconite production. It's a college party. We're 18. There's alcohol. We could be having so much more fun. I mentioned the story because that is the day I decided that despite my best efforts, I think I was going to move back. Because I did not want to be an iron miner. I had no interest in that, both because it almost killed my grandpa 5 times and my other grandpa 1 specific time. And then my dad being laid off and all my friends' dads being laid off, and the general malaise of the whole situation wasn't very interesting to me. But the business and the world that surrounded it was very interesting to me. And I realized that there was a story to tell. And what did I want to be? Well, I was a journalism major. I wanted to be a writer. And every writer has to have a subject. And you can try to write about everything, but you're probably not going to be very good at that. It helps to have an entry point, something you know and believe in and feel very deep to be at the core of what you write about. And I write about a lot of stuff, maybe even everything, but it always comes from a place. And I think people notice when you've got a place. All my favorite writers were from places. I mentioned Chicago, Mike Royko, the columnist from the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times. I think he was at the Chicago Tribune more. And I remember reading him. And I remember reading Dave Barry and Carl Hiaasen from Miami. And I remember Jim Heffernan in Duluth, even locally. And Jim Klobuchar was before my time, but my grandpa loved Jim Klobuchar for the Minneapolis Star Tribune so much that when Jim Klobuchar sobered up, my grandpa sobered up. When Jim Klobuchar got on a bike and started riding around the state to show how you did that, my grandpa went out and bought a bike. But I forgot to mention, this is the grandpa that had a really terrible mining accident and he couldn't really ride a bike very well. So do you know what happened? I got the bike. And I like to point out that Jim Klobuchar is indirectly the reason I got my best and favorite bike during my age 12 to 18 years. Anyway, so I always had these connections to writers who wrote from a place. And they're all over the world, but this is just something really special to me. And so when I got out of college, I did come back. I had, at that point, met and was dating someone from up here, which was a factor, believe me, in that as well. And we ended up in Hibbing. And I was a young reporter, brand new, 21 years old. And I was the only one on staff in the news department who could lay out the paper on the new digital system. This was the year 2001. And that led to a brief experiment that was very consequential to me, which is I was the boy editor of the Hibbing Daily Tribune. I was 21 years old. My publisher, who believed I was 28, because I looked 28, offered me the job as the managing editor of the Hibbing Daily Tribune, and I suddenly became the youngest person in the room who was also the boss. And that was a wild time, 2.5 years. It'll put hair on your chest, believe me, and maybe some ulcers in your stomach and lingering trauma that lives to this day. But nevertheless, I learned a heck of a lot real quickly about the range as not only I imagined it, but as it was, because this was not just mining, and it was the economy, it was the political system, it was the way people are, the cultural history. And that's when I first started. The first interview I did about Iron Range history occurred during that time when I was editor. And I really marked that as the beginning of another phase of my writing life, which is history. And so some of you knew or know my book, Overburden, which came out in 2008, which was, I don't have a copy to show you, but if you can picture a book and on the cover is a small boy, and this boy is my oldest son, Henry, who was three when we took the picture and put it on the cover of that book. And that boy is now bearded, 20, and he's on a cruise somewhere spraying herbicides under power lines somewhere in the middle of the state. I don't know where. And so lots can change in the time since that book came out. And I do have another book coming out, tentatively titled "Power in the Wilderness." And some of you may know the podcast of the same name. And if you haven't, and you like listening to things that are storytelling oriented, you might want to try Power in the Wilderness. Carl Jacob, my friend, and I made the podcast. He's a film director and producer. I'm a historian, college instructor, and writer. And we were both chasing the story of Victor L. Power, mayor of Hibbing, 1913 to 1923, and really uncovering kind of a hidden gem of a historical story about one small town's fight against the world's largest corporation, and how that town secured itself in some form into the future by successfully winning in political and legal combat against really an otherworldly large company. A lot of you have asked me about the book because I may have announced that I was starting to write the book in 2016. Occurs to me, it's getting to be some time ago. And I may have, in fact, been writing the book very intensely for the first 5 of those years. And then we did the podcast, and I announced that any day now this book would be coming out. And the thing of it is, and this is just, I'm going to plea for mercy. You might be able to tell that I love nuances and details. I'm easily distracted by stories and trivia. And this book is, okay, you know, a ream of paper has 500 pages in it. I needed 2 reams of paper to print the manuscript of the book. And it was just shy of 1,000 words. It was, or not words, pages, correct, not words. If it was words, I could publish it as a column and this thing would be over. I'd be free at last. But alas, it is almost 1,000 pages of printed content. And so, you might know of books that are very large and you might buy them at the bookstore, the Robert Caro's of the world. It did not help that I read Robert Caro's The Power Broker right before I started the book. Poor choice, because that's a classic 1,200 page tome. Very, very excellent, and that's what I wanted to write. It was an excellent, incredibly long, incredibly literally heavy, hard to carry book. And I did. But publishers, they buy paper and they buy ink, and they're trying to save money as well. They should, because people have to buy the book. No one wants to pay $60 for, a 5-pound chunk of content. So we're in the process of winnowing it down. Only the gold shall survive. Only the good stuff. We're working on it, but that has taken a lot longer. So anyway, that's coming out. But as in Lacey's very kind introduction, I spent a lot of years as a blogger. After I left the paper to become a teacher, I went back to grad school to teach communication, trying to settle down, have a family, have money. It's called money. And leaving the small town journalism world to afford a house and children. I did that for many years, but shortly after leaving the paper, I really couldn't leave it behind. They asked if I would continue writing a column, and so I did. So for 21 years, I wrote a column for the Hibbing Daily Tribune and Mesabi, then later the Mesabi Tribune. And back in 2006, there was this hot new thing called blogging. I don't know, you may have heard of the blogs on the internet, it's called. I think it's called the interwebs, something like that. And back then, that was new and cool. And about a year after it was peak cool, I got involved and and started writing a blog about northern Minnesota called Minnesota Brown. I still write there, but mostly what I do now is share, uh, my columns that I write, and I'm not blogging every day like I did for about 10 years. But I am still writing there, and it's my professional writing site now, and I do blog occasionally new things. So from there, I'm a teacher, I'm a blogger, I'm a columnist, and a parent of three kids, and very busy life. But something kind of, I don't know, things just started moving, changing just in the last couple years. I had an experience. My mother had a stroke, and she was a working person in her early 60s when it happened, and very young. And she survived, but she's been disabled by it. And so her life really changed, but my life as her oldest and local son also changed. And then my kids, as I mentioned, they were little nubbins on the front of my book, babies, and now they're all grown up. My youngest twins just graduated high school. They're 18, and everybody's leaving. Everybody's leaving. And so, middle of last year, I know a lot of journalists around the state, and I know a lot of people, and eventually it became clear that I'd have an opportunity to at first write as a contributing columnist for the Star Tribune, and then just a few months ago, an opportunity opened up to become a full-time columnist for the now called the Minnesota Star Tribune, uh, um, and I'd be able to work from here. And so I always tell groups like this, if you hear a rumor that I'm now in Minneapolis working for the Star Tribune, swat that down, because yes, it's true. I do work for the Star Tribune. I am based locally and will remain so. That was a non-negotiable on my part. I am still based in northern Minnesota, and I still have, for the most part, liberty to write about topics of my choosing. So I'm involved with the paper. I shouldn't call it a paper. We're actually told not to. We're a media pioneering media frontier or something like that. Don't tell them I said that, but we're so much more than a paper. I just got to be clear about that. But seriously, they rebranded as the Minnesota Star Tribune, and I'm like you. I'm skeptical. Who would buy into this? The metro media has always been kind of metrocentric, and how could it not be if you live down there? And some of you know this. You've lived down there, or maybe still live down there. It's when you're down there in the cities, it's very easy to live in that world. It's very easy to just go around and do your thing, and you don't have to think about anything else. And I would say you could do that in Nashwauk just as easily as you can in Minneapolis, and I know people who do. But we all tend to focus on our small world at the expense of the larger world. And what the Minnesota Star Tribune is doing with investing, not just in me, but in a whole bureau of greater Minnesota reporters and columnists, is trying to get the word out that we're not just a Twin Cities publication anymore, statewide news operation, big ambitions to really put a lot of new great content about greater Minnesota out into the world. And I don't know if anybody's high school sports but fans, but there's a new strip varsity feature that they're offering. They're going to follow high school sports throughout the state. And so, if you ever know ESPN, if you're a sports fan, you go to ESPN, you can set your favorite teams and you can get the customized, I have the Lynx and the Twins. I don't know what, I'm one of the few anyway, who has that combination. But anyway, you can put your local high school, and they're going to have every high school in the state in this thing. And so if you wanted to put Ely High School or Rock Ridge or any local school, it'll show you their schedule, their results, and as they staff up, and they're staffing up now, they're going to actually have coverage and even some live games and coverage of high school sports in all kinds of sports. And so I only mention that just as an example of why I made the decision to make that jump, is I felt I had a chance to be a part of something that was really bringing the story of Greater Minnesota out to people. And as far as my day-to-day job, in addition to coming up here talking to you folks, it's unchanged in terms of how I've written over the last 25 years. I'm finding stories of Minnesota. I'm finding stories of my own history with the mining, and some of you have kindly pointed out the piece I wrote that was published just last Sunday that was about my first time flying over the Mesabi Iron Range and Vermilion Iron Ranges, and seeing the mining properties, the tailings basins, the dumps, the pits, the works from the air from the first time, and then mixing that with my own stories of covering that industry from the ground. And so I like to highlight things that really only I, or that few but I, could write about. I learned this blogging back when I started, is it's very easy to start writing about politics and then just write about the thing that everybody's writing about. There's always a story of the day. We know this. We don't like all the stories of the day, but we want to write about the latest outrage, the latest controversy, and the latest thing that everybody on the internet is talking about. I do write about things that are popular, but I only want to write about those things if they relate to something special and unique that my reporting or my experiences can bring. And so when I come up to a place here like Ely, and I meet so many of you as I have and will yet, I'm looking for stories. I'm looking for something unique that could only happen because I was here and because I talked to you. And so that's the kind of thing I try to do. And so this is my way of saying, as in an open invitation, though we may not have time today, there's a heck of a lot of you. But my contact information at minnesotabrown.com. If you go to contact on minnesotabrown.com, my website, you can reach out to me if you have an idea or something you think I should know about. Always interested. I can't write about everything, but if I can find a connection to the kinds of things I write about, I'm always looking. So that's my way of saying, please reach out. I'm a columnist for the editorial page, which is to say, it's another thing that's changed. Instead of writing newspaper editorials that are unsigned, that come from the paper as though on high, the edicts of Zeus from Olympus, rather than that, we are switching to a format where the editorial board each kind of has their little corner, and they write from their own point of view. We do discuss and intermingle our opinions, but that's me. I'm one of those people, and it's my job to look out for Greater Minnesota, to look out for working class people who may not have access to fancy Twin Cities stuff, and to look out for just the kind of the underdogs. I'm always looking for people out on the road who, like that kid I was in the trailer house on the junkyard where I grew up, that aren't easy to categorize. We like to categorize Minnesotans. There's Greater Minnesota, which is of course red, conservative, and then in Metro Minnesota, which is blue and liberal. And in fact, we are a very complex state, and even in our individual regions, far more complex than than many people would be surprised to learn. Many people would be surprised to learn that a group like the Ely Tuesday group could put 90-ish to 100-ish people together on a summer after. I couldn't get people to come at night to a thing in the summer. When I did the radio show, it was hard. You all just show up at noon on a Tuesday? It's wild. So I'll take it. It's cool. It's very cool. Yeah, give yourselves a round of applause. Absolutely. I think one of my big takeaways from being here is just seeing all of you come to an event like this and share your experiences, and that's really cool. So I know that there will be some questions because I was warned that there would be. And so if you know my work, or if you just have a general question and you want to talk about something, now is the opportunity. So, and I think Lacey has a microphone for those who have questions. There's some in the back. Always in the back, make the people work.
Well, and then while I'm walking back there, I'll ask you, with your observations in your career and your responsibility to tell stories about working class people, what do you think you would give? What advice would you give to an active community member who's trying to do a better job of serving and including working class people?
That's great. Great question. The advice I always give is try to go to where the people are. The stories, we are, human beings are amazing creatures. We've survived all this time with an incredibly sharp intellect that can perceive risk and danger and threat and overcome it and solve problems. And it's a great mind, but it has weak spots. And one of the things is we resist change and discomfort. So whether, I don't care whether you're right wing or left wing or well educated or not well educated. The problem we all have is that we tend to stay within our group of people, and we have a difficult time because it is difficult getting outside of that. So for me, my life has put me in a lot of spaces where I'm in mixed groups of people. And I also try to seek them out when I can. Little things like my mother, I take my mother shopping every week. And in Hibbing, the only place to get absolutely everything, this might not play well with this crowd, but it's Walmart. It's the only place, right? So we go to Walmart every week. Now, my mother, I love my mother. She has a walker. She doesn't want to be told what to do. She doesn't want interference or opinions from her son, which means I leave her alone. But that means I have 2 hours that I spend every Friday, typically, in the Hibbing Walmart with, believe me, my shopping is well done. It's over. If you're like me, you go in and you get your stuff and you leave 10 minutes, if at all possible. And so I have a lot of time walking around and just seeing and to a lesser degree interacting, but just kind of seeing what people are talking about. I know maybe it's creepy, but I eavesdrop all over the place. And I just want to know what people are experiencing. It's not that I quote them or write about them specifically. The guy at Walmart says, no, it's not that, but it's that you get a handle on what people are talking about from an experience standpoint, so that when you get in a room or on the phone with somebody who knows something about a topic, you can say, hey, folks are saying this, or a lot of people are interested in this new thing, or something like that. And you can kind of take kind of observations from society, a mixed group of people, and apply it to, your own educated research-based knowledge pursuit. I'm an egghead. I told you at a young age I was an egghead. My head is literally egg-shaped. It's enormous. I had to special order that hat. It's so big. But we, so I love research and I love proper citations. Oh man, I'm done teaching. I taught for 21 years, and I'm finally getting to the point where I don't have to say, please properly cite your sources using MLA or APA formatting. it's getting to be good. But anyway, you can kind of look for opportunities where it is. I realize I went too long. Go ahead, Lacey.
Hi, Aaron. My name's Bria Shirky.
Oh, hey, Bria, we just talked. Yeah.
Many of you might know, born and raised in Ely by many people actually in this room. Mr. Dawn. I just want to personally thank you for the voice that you've lent to our rural healthcare force.
Oh, thank you.
I'm an emergency medicine PA. I work at the Virginia ER and the Duluth Trauma Center. And you have written very powerful pieces speaking truth to the issues we're facing, very serious issues in our rural healthcare system and all of the Iron Range. Many of my patients are the miners that you speak of. I think the poverty in our community is hidden, but it is deep and it is real. And so I was one of the folks that sent Aaron an email last week regarding some issues we're facing as rural healthcare providers, and he was gracious and called me immediately. I was actually in a picket line outside of my employer's.
Bria was in my column on Saturday, actually, if you all read it, but yeah.
And he wrote a very gracious, powerful piece, like sharing my voice and giving a voice to a local. And so I'm just grateful for it. But also hoping that maybe you could touch on some of the issues that the most pressing issues in our rural healthcare that you have noted in your reporting. Especially in the light of current political issues, I think a lot is ahead and a long road is ahead, especially in this area.
Thank you, Bria. And I want to highlight Bria. Yeah, give her a hand because it's one thing to say, and I did when I was at the paper as a younger man writing editorials every day. I'd write editorials like, we need to have good health care, and it's newspaper writers can say that all the time, but what really makes a difference are people's real stories and experiences. And so Bria was very kind to share her experiences as a physician associate and as working with patients here on the Iron Range. And that is really what made the argument clear for people is here's what's really happening, not what the politicians on either side are saying and not what policy analysts are putting in their lengthy reports, but like on the ground experience. And that's the kind of thing that's so valuable. And so that's another thing. I mentioned my mother's stroke. It's like if it activated me in any way, it was on rural healthcare because rural healthcare was a problem when I was a kid in its own way. It was always challenging to get to the doctor if you live far away. Zim did not have a clinic. And my family did not have health insurance at the junkyard. Blue Cross did not cover us. Well, I should say they didn't have any money. That was the thing. So we didn't have health insurance growing up. And fortunately, none of my mother, father, sisters, or I got sick. Or if one of us had gotten leukemia or something, it would have been a life-changing disaster. Not just the disaster of being sick and trying to recover, but the disaster financially that would have occurred had that happened, or an injury or something severe. So it was already bad. Most of us who live in the area knew that this is not a new thing to find access to healthcare. But what's happening is our system is creaking and cracking and now crumbling right in front of us as these particularly rural hospitals, but I won't say that any hospital is doing really well, but rural hospitals are literally on the cusp of financial insolvency if they aren't already there. And nursing homes have been closing, I think 26, so it's in the 20s, have closed just in the last 5 years. And so nursing homes are one kind of private business model. But clinics, and you also see it in the ambulance debate that I know up here in Ely, there's been a debate, and Nashwauk was what got me into that topic because I live in the Nashwauk service area for the Nashwauk ambulance, and they didn't know how or to what degree they could provide ambulance service. Well, those problems that the ambulance services have, which are reimbursement rates, increasingly older population, and more need, difficulties finding people to take the jobs because the jobs don't pay as well as they should. These are the same problems facing hospitals and clinics as well. And so we're having this just enormous challenge making it work. And it's all fine and good when the hospitals can take losses and maybe have it backfilled by COVID funding and things like that that have happened. But we're on now in the current political environment, the cusp of a massive shift in funding. Not directly, but when you start to trim the eligibility for Medicaid, you start to see just less money coming into the clinics and hospitals. And it's got like a starving effect on clinics that were already failing. So Bria knows all about this because she's living it. But most of you probably, if I hope you have the luxury of just having halfway decent health insurance or Medicare, and you just get to go to the doctor when you need to, and it's all cool. A lot of people have that experience, but a lot fewer people are going to have that experience going forward. And that's something it's going to dramatically change our way of life in northern Minnesota and make it really challenging for a lot of people. And I am trying to come at it from a standpoint of compassion and care and really preserving quality of life for all walks of life, so that when you walk in, you have access to healthcare. There are deeper arguments systemically about what we should really do for healthcare. But I think the Hippocratic Oath is a start. Let's start by not harming anything from this point forward. And that's a good place to start. So I don't know if that answers, but there you go. Yes, in the back there.
Yeah.
Oh, nope, there we go.
And then I'll come.
Okay, I'm a seasonal resident, but this is my 68th summer, so that adds up.
That's what time divided by 4. That's several years. That's
Yeah,
a
right.
good couple decades. Yeah.
Could you comment on your view of the economy, in view of the proposal to establish a copper nickel mine on the edge of the boundary waters, problems that raises,
Mhm.
and pushes, saying, well, we need more jobs.
Yeah.
Better economy.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Jobs versus the economy, or sorry, economy versus the environment, jobs versus environmental protection. That's often how the issue is framed. I have, I'm not trying to be coy. I always kind of feel like, I don't know if you all saw the movie Gandhi. I mean, it's a deep cut, but there's a scene in the division of when India gets its independence, and there's the division of India and Pakistan. And there's a scene where after this division, you see the Pakistanis raise their flag and play their anthem. And then you see the Indians raise their flag and play their anthem. And then you see Gandhi's house, which has a flagpole with no flag and just the little chain clanking against the flagpole. And that's how I have endeavored to be in this debate. in that I realize there are very strong and very valid opinions about the issue. I have just tried to come at it more from the standpoint of broadly, what's the right way to do things. And as far as the one thing that I do feel very strongly about is that I really try to swat down the notion that is often sold that inherently building a mine of any kind, a modern mine, even a copper nickel mine, will in itself, in some sort of magical way, return us to the glory years of the early 50s, mid 70s, whatever boom time you want to highlight, and solve our current economic problems. I don't think it will or can, and that's not anybody's fault. It is a modern mine, is going to hire, as we see happening right now. Mesabi Metallics is trying to build an advanced iron mine out in the western Mesabi near where I live, and that mine, you already see what new mines do. A couple hundred people. They just bought, it's in the news today, 400-ton trucks. haul trucks. So that's 25% bigger than the haul trucks at most of the current taconite mines. They can be automated. They will be automated as soon as they figure out how it works, which could take a while. But and that's that's quote unquote progress. But mines that are profitable have fewer employees, more technology now. They're bigger equipment, bigger capacity, smaller workforce. Again, just a reality of the business. It's not, doesn't make it bad. Those jobs can be good jobs. And yes, to borrow some rhetoric, maybe we do need, quote unquote, the minerals in some capacity. But in the broader context of an economic solution, if we're talking about economics, I don't think that can be the whole solution. And in fact, being through this debate for 20 years now, I'd say that the thinking that goes behind the economic solution is mining is actually the problem. We need to break that idea most of all. Even if we are okay with a mine, or if we find a way to mine responsibly, we still have to break the notion that these mines will bring back the thousands of jobs lost to automation over the course of the last 30 or 40 years. It just can't do that. And oftentimes the debate ends up, and I hate, it has a nostalgia to it. It has a softened edge to it that is more about, I wish I were young again and the whole world was ahead of me and my car was 8 cylinders and it was cool and I was cool and I looked good and I felt good and I want to go back to that. And I know you do. I'm getting old enough to understand that feeling quite well. But economically, we have to prepare for a change that is much bigger than us, much bigger than one area and one industry. The jobs, the way that people work are changing, and they're going to change more. Higher ed, newspaper. I'm doomed. You know, has nothing to do with mining, copper, or any of that. I'm doomed because of technological change. And so I realize I'm skirting the issue a little bit. We could talk about the environment. We could talk about mining techniques. I have gotten to know some about all of those things. But I think if I had one magical thing I could do, it would be to get everybody, whether you support something like twin metals or oppose something like twin metals, get everybody thinking about actual economic solutions that engage with the modern economy in a more profound way than just hoping that things go back to when the range was hopping. We were winning state titles and it was cool. I get it. We want it to be cool again. That's a good goal. But how we get to that point might look completely different than even us here in this room can imagine. It might look quite different indeed. So we don't know where that is, but we should be looking for it.
I can assure you we are looking.
Yes.
We are trying, Mr. Brown.
Okay, good. Keep it up.
Well, I'm glad you're looking and we're looking. I come from small town area. I've lived in Ely, of course.
Yeah.
Small town forever. But you have also been in Sac-Zim and you're in Nashwauk, Keewatin now. And so you talked about the mining aspect of the identity that's placed upon our area. What other identity can you tell me that you see in even Nashwauk's future? I mean, it's you've got a source of income and things working remotely, and so do you have to be functioning remotely in a virtual world?
Yep.
Or
a lot of Zooms.
If you were going to tell somebody, what stands out as a vision for something other than just mining in Nashwauk?
Yeah, great question. And that's the hard part, is that if we're imagining a post-mining future, which we should, because even if mining lasts 100 years, the reality is it will end eventually. If we're imagining that post-mining future, I have spent my career, and I've asked this question openly, and I have gone on historical tours all over the country, and asked this question: is where is there a mining area of any kind that successfully spun off from mining and became really successful doing something else entirely? Ely? Well, the best examples I found would be one like Ely, which is they found a way to do a dynamic tourism industry that wasn't just tours of the old mines, but that engaged with something else. And of course, we have the boundary waters here, and we have the natural world, and a lot of things that would meet that bill. But the challenge, as people in Ely well know, is that this is a great industry, tourism and bringing people to town. I was just in Bragas before I came here, and it was hopping, and we're hoping for that. But how do you make it work year round? How do you make it work in a way that is paying people's bills? And of course, with real estate, I could go on about real estate, but you can get a job, you can work full time, but buying a house, even the house here in Ely now, is getting harder because of the prices. And I always say, like, there's markets in this country that have so much more equity in them, in the property, that when they come to a place like northern Minnesota, it's like they have monopoly money. They can just crack open the monopoly box, and it's like not even real money. They can just buy whatever they want, and meanwhile we're hard earning our real money trying to scrape enough pennies to do stuff, and that's a really challenging situation. But other examples were where people or towns were absorbed by larger metropolizing places, where a mining area was consumed. But that too seems kind of impossible in an area as remote, relatively speaking, as ours. So maybe Duluth becomes a shining metropolis, but even if it did, at best it would consume cotton. They wouldn't quite get this far. Like they couldn't get us. They're just too far away. The outer reaches, cotton will be a ritzy suburb, and I don't know. But you don't want to go too much further north because of the bog and the mosquitoes. So anyway, that's probably just as well. Yeah, go ahead.
It's gonna pivot to another question.
Please, I'm done. Please stop.
Aaron, I've been a longtime fan of your blog and happy to read you in the Star Tribune.
Thank you.
You had an editorial a few weeks, well, who knows?
Yeah.
Recently, about the potential for helium.
Oh yeah.
And I was so intrigued by that.
Yeah.
And I just thought, as we're looking, we're so focused on the mining, or
yeah,
there's other things we could be planning.
Yeah.
For,
oh, thanks for bringing that up. I wrote that editorial. I had the same thing happen years ago, where I was invited to host a country western show on the stage of the Hibbing Community College Theater. And I wore a polyester western shirt with the big bright blue arrows on it, and I looked ridiculous, but I was having a great time, and I was doing jokes and country western hee-haw jokes. And I wrote a column about it, and it was just so charming and fun, and it ran on 9/11. And so flash forward to me writing this helium piece about airships. And I'm trying to write this whimsical, fun piece about blimps, and how I know we can all make fun of blimps, but then it ran on the day of the assassinations, or the day before the assassinations a few weeks ago. And so I'm glad somebody read it, because it was not, didn't go exactly where I wanted it to. But we all know, or maybe have heard, pulsar helium is exploring down by Babbitt, or actually just over the Lake County line, way out there. And actually I saw it on that plane trip I took with the mining. I didn't talk about it in the column, but I took some pictures and looked down on that site where I had visited a couple times, way out in the middle of nowhere by all appearances. And yeah, there's a potential of helium. And the thing that you have to know is it's not like mining. It's a handful of jobs. It's not some big, huge, vast industry that will sprout out of it, but it is a ready supply of a really unique element that could potentially, the real draw of something like helium isn't the helium industry itself, though that's fine, we'll benefit from that. But it's the related industry that you can get by being near helium. And so my column was about airships. And I know, believe me, I know why you would be skeptical about a claim that airships could revolutionize travel in the 21st century. Doesn't seem, the Goodyear blimp, remember? You've seen it. And yes, there was a little problem in New Jersey back in the 30s. That was hydrogen, but that was, thank you, that was hydrogen. That was a different gas entirely. Helium is non-flammable. Wouldn't have happened with helium. But in truth, helium airships at scale, they'd be very large airships, could be used as regional, like you could get to a place like the Iron Range and get a product to China or Europe, not overnight, they're not speed demons, but they can go straight up and straight over, and they don't have to stop, and they don't have to be exchanged at ports, and they don't have to change rail lines or load onto ships and unload off of ships. It's one shot to wherever your product needs to go. And there's actually a lot of people I learned all over the world exploring this. I talked to a guy, he's a Englishman, but he actually was in the United Arab Emirates when I talked to him, president of the Airship Association. And he talks about this. I talked to a college professor in Winnipeg at the University of Manitoba who is one of the world experts on this subject. Again, not far away. Winnipeg's not far away. And he's got a whole transportation institute that's exploring this question. And it's actually agricultural areas and rural areas that would benefit the most from this mode of commercial transportation. It's kind of outlandish because blimps would be huge. And can you imagine 100 blimps kind of just tootling around? It would look very different than it looks today. But then again, so is everybody sitting in public, looking at their phones instead of at each other. And we wouldn't have predicted that 20 years ago, but that's what we've got now. And so, and whether it's or semiconductor manufacturing, cooling elements that helium you can maybe look into some manufacturing that you wouldn't have ever considered prior in a place like this because helium isn't like other things. It escapes its tanks. It'll weave. You put it in a steel tank, and the molecules will sneak out like kids going to a party. And they don't just hang around. They go to space. They leave the atmosphere. They go to some distant star, and they form a cloud, and they make more stars somewhere else. Helium is not like other things. So because you have to use it quickly after you take it out of the ground, it behooves industry to be near where helium is eventually, especially as helium prices rise. Okay.
We're gonna do one last question.
Sorry, I've been talking too much.
I mean, that was excellent.
Okay.
The helium to the stars thing's worth it.
Okay, good.
So, Aaron,
Closer.
the Twin Metals is an ultimate example of what we think of as an industrial model of economic development.
Mhm.
If you build it, they will come.
Mhm.
We'll bring all these jobs because we built this chopsticks factory or whatever
Mhm.
it might be. If for those who may remember, Boundary Waters Connect, the host of this organization and many other activities, has dedicated itself to a slightly different model, which is new resident recruitment and retention, based in part on conversations with you and the Center for Community Vitality, where there's strong research and evidence of rural in-migration, and that there's a real appeal to communities that have wonderful recreational amenities like we do, and that quality of life that's truly unique. What we've learned as well, though, is there's significant obstacles to that model as well, and they include housing, childcare, and broadband. Those are the three that are mentioned most often. You may have others, but I'm curious where you see the greatest need, priority in helping us cross that divide and make ourselves as impactful as we possibly
Yeah. Well, because I spent COVID in the basement doing historical research about 19 teens hibbing, I'm going to start there. So you talk about in-migration being itself a strategy. And I will say there's historical precedent for that in our own local histories here on the Iron Range and in northern Minnesota, or even America, across America broadly, but especially here on the Iron Range. What changed? What was life like before, say, 1910? Of course, it was, a lot of the towns were smaller. You had a lot of money-seeking entrepreneurs, individuals scrapping for supremacy in a very tight and difficult market. Money it was difficult to get your goods out of here because of it was so hard to move the iron ore, the logs, whatever. It was challenging. What changed? What made us so big? In fact, I'll use another example. A lot of people are celebrating their 50th high school reunions this summer, and I've been reading about them, and it's class of 75. And the class of 75 for a lot of range schools was one of the biggest classes in their school's history. Not necessarily true at every school, but that era broadly was about the biggest class. I know in Hibbing and a lot of these towns was around that time. And it was because if you subtract from that event and all of the requisite good times, remember 8-cylinder engines and having a good time, you go back to the good times that their parents had and when they were having them, they were the first generation, maybe the sons or maybe the grandchildren, but probably the sons and daughters of immigrants. And those immigrants came for work at a time, but they didn't just come because of they wanted to support the mining industry. They didn't come here because the mining industry supported them. It wasn't anything like that. They came because they had to come somewhere because they had it in their minds that this was a place you could find a foothold in America. And they came with their friends and their family and their communities who left. You know, 10 young men from a little village in somewhere in Europe would decide we're going to America. Let's stick together. Let's all go to Minnesota because there's mines there. Maybe we'll find work. Maybe we'll find logging work. Maybe we'll work in town. Maybe we'll start a business. What they all really wanted was land so they could farm. And so they came here because it was here, not because of a specific job with a specific job title. Then that's how we think about it nowadays, because that's how we all get by in our modern lives. We got a job, we got insurance. But the bigger macro growth is in people congregating around the idea of building something. And that's something that is not industry specific. And so I don't know if that quite answers what you're looking at, but that's kind of what I look at. You know, I think a lot of problems would be cured if 1,000 people came to the range right now. Now, it would be hard.
Tell your friends.
It would be hard. I know housing stinks. We got a lot of housing problems. We'd have to address that. They did in 1913, 15, that era. There would be a period of difficulty. Yes, new people would be different. They'd think differently. But if they had a crap ton of babies, then the class of 2075 would be the biggest classes on the range. So,
Well, thank you so much, Aaron Brown.
I did not mean to end on the phrase crap ton of babies, but I did.